me? Does this work? Is it working? Yes? I have 2 microphones, so I feel a little bit like Britney Spears right now. Thank you, Kayla, for that very nice introduction. I'm the corporate archivist here at Herman Miller, so kind of like a corporate historian. I manage all the historic assets that we have. It's a company that's over 100 years old, which is pretty amazing, and has been based here in New Zealand since the founding. I have a really fun job. You're going to see some of the stuff that I manage, and yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not talking to you about various jams and jellies and other preserves today. It will be like old paper-based documents and such. So we are on this site right now. This is Herman Miller's main site. It is a building that was designed by George Nelson. A lot of manufacturing happens in this building. There's an area called the Spine that's just this way. I'll show you a picture of it. This is my favorite building of Herman Miller's. I mean, I'm sure some of you have been to the design yard, but I think this is in reality our most rich architecturally significant building that we still have here in Zealand, aside from the Max and Esther Dupree house, which is an Eames house that's right down the street here on Division, which is pretty cool. So we actually have an Eames house here in West Michigan. These are some photos of the site around the time of its building that were taken by Bruce Davidson, who was a pretty famous photographer at the time. He was just here visiting, kind of seeing the manufacturing processes, and was friends with the George Nelson office, but ended up taking really amazing photos around the grounds. The Spine, which is what I just told you about, it's a walkway that connects. Now it's like this front building that you're in, and then IT is at the end. But what my favorite thing is walking down this catwalk and seeing all of the various manufacturing that happens right here in West Michigan, whether it's veneering. Seating doesn't happen here, but it's really cool, like if you're into seeing manufacturing process. So just a little bit of my background. I studied art history, and I also studied library science. So I kind of got my start preserving in a rare book library called the Lilly Library on Indiana University's campus. I was really lucky in that I was a page there, which means like literally researchers would come in, they would write down a call number on a slip, I would wear a beeper, and then they would page me, and then I would go find it in a closed stacks environment. But that meant I got to roam this amazing collection kind of just on my own and sort of looked at things when I wasn't paging. And one of my favorite things that I came across while doing that was marbled end papers that were laid into, wealthy people would have their libraries bound so that it all looked the same. But then also there are regional marbling techniques that you can start to identify if you see enough. But I was in the stacks all by myself. Instagram had just become a thing. So I was like, cool, this is awesome. It's like, I'm not a selfie kind of person, and like, I feel like this is stuff that people like to see, but that's sort of how I got my start thinking about how you share archival or preserved material with the masses. I think sometimes people think about libraries and archives and museums as spaces that aren't accessible or always like for you. They are. Use your libraries, go to libraries. They're also like an amazing place for research. I mean, we have Pinterest now, but there's nothing like knowing the context and feeling something in your hands. But this is just from my Instagram feed, but this is sort of how I got started sharing things that people usually don't get to see. So I studied library science. I then started interning at the Indianapolis Museum of Art, and ended up getting hired as an archives assistant to process an architectural archive for the Miller House and Garden, which is located in Columbus, Indiana. So this house was designed by Eero Saarinen. The interiors were done by Alexander Girard, and then the Eameses did the Eames Aluminum Group for the house originally as outdoor furniture. So imagine that. You're like, oh, I need some outdoor furniture, and Girard's doing my interiors. We can't find anything we like. Maybe we'll just call the Eameses. That's what happened. I mean, they're already working on a lot of those concepts, but the project ended up being finished for this home. And so the IMA acquired this house. Along with it came a collection that documented the design, building, and maintenance of the home. So correspondence, textile samples, design drawings, photos of the build. I mean, it was a really cool and really extensive collection, but obviously the people building it, the millers, knew that they were commissioning something that was going to be significant, that they also thought should be documented. So I had the pleasure of digitizing stuff like this, this is Alexander Girard's initial plan for the house. So for the interiors, the first thing that he started with were the rugs. So he laid out this plan, sectioned off all the different parts of the house, and he was a better archivist than I'll ever be, but really liked to document his process by spaces and then spec'd the curtains and the carpets, et cetera, but like this is his plan that he initially created for the millers to help them understand what it was going to look like inside. But basically, like, part of my job was setting up a tripod and capturing this and then describing it and making an electronic record and preserving it in the digital age. Also, there was a lot of ephemera, clippings from where the house was featured, whatever. But basically, it was a very visually rich collection, which wasn't unlike being inside the Lilly Library, but it's just sort of my design education as well. Like, I feel like in college, all of my BFFs ended up being designers, but working with this collection for 2 years really allowed me to be totally immersed in the world of Girard and the Eameses. And it was a 2-year project funded by the NEH. Thank you, National Endowment for the Humanities. Keep getting funded, please. I would not be here without it. So I worked on that project for 2 years. There was a lot of Herman Miller related material in it. And like with any grant-funded project, or if you're a freelancer, there's always an end to something. So I was nearing the end of this. I'm like, oh man, I've really painted myself into this corner. I wonder if Herman Miller has an archive, and literally thought that. I'm like, that might be a cool place to work one day. During the digitization process, part of the parameters given by the NEH was you need to document the project. And so if you guys remember Tumblr, it was really cool. It had just come out, and I think libraries and archives and museums were really starting to understand how they could make their content more accessible and contextualized. And so I had the brilliant idea of making a Tumblr for the digitization project. And so as we were photographing or scanning really cool things like this needlepoint pattern that Girard made, and then Xenia Miller's bridge group all sat around and needle-pointed cushions for their Sarin and Tulip dining chairs. Sorry, Noel, awesome. But yeah, so there was just a lot of cool stuff that was coming across my desk every day, that being somebody who was a design fan and somebody that is a very visual person, like, this is really inspiring, and it's cool to see process, and it's cool to understand how and why things get made versus just like seeing this pop up on a generated Pinterest page and being like, cool, colors, yeah. But also having the, again, the context, the knowing why and how it happened. And so these posts would contain a short description. It would also contain like the metadata of where you could find it if perhaps you wanted to go on site and do research. The collection is now fully digitized and accessible online. But this project sort of garnered some, I guess, press in the design world. It got picked up by a few different outlets just because I think it was a unique project at the time, but ended up catching the attention of someone here at Herman Miller that literally DM'd me on Twitter and was like, we're opening up this archives position. Might you be interested? And I'm like, yes! So also Steve Frickholm, who's here, was kind of on an exploratory committee to understand what Herman Miller could do with this amazing archival collection that they had that had been amassed really since the genesis of the company. But the business has changed over the years. It's gone from a residential furniture company to an office furniture company, and I think sort of the early years and the design heritage wasn't lost, but it wasn't a priority for some time. And now that Herman Miller is sort of shifting back into work can happen anywhere, where you work, live, and heal. So how can we use these stories and provide context for how and why this company has stayed around for so long? So this is the entrance to my office. Our goal, or our mission, is to collect, preserve, and inspire. So I'm constantly interfacing with people around the business, whether it's R&D or design or editorial, either to collect their material, to preserve it, which literally just means like putting it in boxes and making it accessible and finding, and then using it to inspire people. So not only am I ingesting material from people around the business, but I'm acting as a conduit or somebody that's facilitating research in the collection, or just making people aware that it's something that can be used either for inspiration. I interface with our legal team when we're pursuing trade dress. I have a lot of tours that I give to customer groups. Again, I'm kind of like the corporate historian, so anytime anyone wants to know about the history of Herman Miller, I'm usually who they get. Just some views of my office. It's literally located in a giant warehouse space. There's so much material. There's over, I want to say, 4,000 boxes. We have a vault, which is really cool. So that is where the humidity and temperature are a little bit more tightly controlled. That's also, we have some early furniture pieces, and then also things like photo negatives and earlier publications. I believe, yeah. This is another view. So flat files that we keep drawings in, posters, renderings, really nice Alexander Girard environmental enrichment panel just chilling up there. I love these compact shelving systems. So you roll them and then it opens up and you have even more storage space, like so. We have a huge textile collection as well from Alexander Girard. So a lot of the manufacturing of textiles would happen right here in Zeeland, and they're all screen printed, really inky, really beautiful. But we use these to now kind of pursue product development with Meharim, that is a textile company that's a part of the Herman Miller family, that also continues to produce Alexander Girard designs. But they'll sort of start here, go through our collection and use it as sort of a working archive. I'll get into it, or I might repeat myself, but Herman Miller material is held in collections literally around the world. And so our archive here, coming from an art museum and a rare book library where that's like sort of your task is to save it and protect it and keep it sort of locked up. At Herman Miller, because we're in a corporate entity, I feel like it's more of a working collection, and we're able to facilitate use and have people come through. And it's precious, but I would rather people use it and be able to make new things from it or make something better. So the Textile Collection is an example. Of course, some of the famous molded plywood splints from the Eameses, but then also this is an awesome piece from, if you've been to GRR Airport, all of the Eames tandem seating that's in there, that is a wood prototype of what is now an aluminum element of the seat. So just, again, an example of like all the types of stuff that we have kept in this collection over the years. There's also a lot of personal correspondence between the designers and people at Herman Miller. I love this letter from Ray Eames to Jim Eppinger, who was our East Coast sales manager in the 50s. But, you know, they were all friends. It was a small outfit at that time, and there's a lot of really personal correspondence. This is one of my favorite things that came from the Duprees, the founders of the company. I empathize with it a lot, or it makes me feel better. It says, "Dear DJ," DJ Dupree was the founder of the company. This was meant for Christmas, then in New Year's, late as usual, but thought, oh shoot, what does it say? But thought that the Duprees might enjoy these word relations. So I just like that Ray Eames also is very late sometimes on giving people presents. And this is a book from Sister Carita Kent, who is a really cool screen printing nun that the Eameses hung out with. Like I said, we also have architectural and design drawings that not only look really cool, but they inform our product development process today. So if we're looking into reviving an archival design, they usually start with me, and to see if we have original drawings or specs or engineering files that could help inform making something as faithfully as possible. Just cool little marks from the Eames office. We also have sales tools. You'll see this again later, but this was from an Action Office 2 sales kit, which was literally like little tiny furniture that salespeople could buy. or this big kit that then they would set up the solution and then show it to their customers. The copy that like sells it to the salespeople is like, just imagine how quick it's going to be for you to set this up. And I've heard salespeople say like, oh my God, it would take 3 hours to set up, what it would look like, and then your client like 10 minutes to tell you that they hated it. But they're cute nonetheless. We also have drawings that kind of hint at what Herman Miller could have been and what it became. So this is a drawing for a livestock identification system from Robert Probst, who is the inventor of Action Office. He was originally hired on to maybe get Herman Miller out of the furniture business. This was in the late 50s, and residential home good sales had sort of declined. Herman Miller was sort of trying to understand how could we get into a systems business. Things like Eames chairs, what you're sitting in, were the first things to sell en masse in an institutional context. So it got business leaders thinking like, well, what are other systems that we might sell? And Probst came up with stuff like this and went from this to like literally sanitary napkins. So any problem that he saw, he'd be like, I think I can maybe do it better, but ultimately ended up inventing the cubicle, more or less. We also have a huge film collection from the Eameses. So the Eameses were prolific filmmakers, and sort of their earliest films were sales tools for Herman Miller. I think at one point, the archive or whatever it was in its earliest iteration sort of acted as a lending library for these films, where if you were out in the field as a salesperson for Herman Miller, you could write in and borrow a film to show to your clients from the Eameses. We're now working with the Library of Congress to preserve master copies of Eames films, which is really cool. So, and those will be able to be screened either here or wherever. But that's sort of how we interface with other collections that have our stuff in it. Also, lots of personal snapshots from different salespeople over the years. This is Alexander Girard and one of his dogs in his homes in Santa Fe, and a snapshot of his giant folk art collection, or a small part of it. Charles and Ray chilling in their home in Pacific Palisades. We also have a huge advertising and ephemera collection. So really any ad that Herman Miller ever produced from the 30s on, we generally have a copy of. Some of my favorite. A lot of these were done by Irving Harper, who was hired by George Nelson, and he designed our logo, which is an M, if you didn't know that. I like this one for the Noguchi table that appeared in the New Yorker, sculpture in wood and glass. Just an example of how the things that we have preserved inform things directly here today from a business perspective. A couple of years ago, DWR, which is another member of the Herman Miller family, came to us. They needed a bed to add into the line, and they came to me. They're like, what's a bed that we might be able to use? Me and a bunch of other people. But we arrived at the Nelson Thin Edge bed, which is very beautiful. So we went back to the drawings, which we still had, and were able to recreate a Nelson Thin Edge bed and a day bed. So just to give you an example of the type of material that we have that we're able to work off of, and this is our bed of today. Another example of that. But it's really cool. I mean, we have these amazing production files that really detail everything from suppliers that we were working with, tiny, measurements that were changed, et cetera, et cetera. So it's this living, breathing collection that, even though it was generated years and years ago, is something that's very much used and alive. I think, again, people always like, oh, archives, they're so dusty, and you rediscover and find things. Like, it might be a little dusty, but it was already there, and somebody documented it and knew that this would be important for the future, and it's there to be used. So it's really fun to be able to facilitate use like this. And then, getting archival material out into press now. I interface a lot with our PR team, social media, but being able to use these assets in new contexts all the time is really cool. Another thing that has been hugely informed by our archival collection and archival collections around the world, including the Vitra Design Museum, the Library of Congress, UCLA, the Eames office in California, the Zealand Historical Society, the Henry Ford, Grand Rapids Public Museum, I could go on and on, is our new book, Herman Miller, A Way of Living, which is a fairly comprehensive history of the company from its start to today. It's 614 pages, but there are a lot of pictures, so I encourage you to check it out. Also, the Museum of Modern Art, Cooper Hewitt. We really went everywhere to sort of cull the best nuggets of Herman Miller history and of the history of the designers that we have worked with over the years. There's also a lot of primary source material that's reproduced in here. So for example, Gilbert Rohde, who was Herman Miller's first modern designer that came on in the early 30s, wrote an article about, he kind of ran an industrial design school in New York in the late 30s, and wrote about, he's kind of taking a Bauhaus approach to how you would educate and use design as a learning tool. So again, just an example, showing you guys some spreads, a lot of advertising material that came out of our own archive, images of our early showrooms, advertisements. There's a whole chapter about the picnic posters, which is really cool. Again, more primary source material, kind of talking about how all of these designers got involved with Herman Miller from the first place, and then also talking about, this is one of my favorite things, this is a postcard advertising the Grand Rapids Furniture Museum, which was in downtown Grand Rapids and was the first project that Herman Miller collaborated with Alexander Girard on. You can see him sitting in this room, which was located up in one of the attics, but basically he was given a room to decorate the interiors and then spec'd all Herman Miller furniture, and then made this mural behind him out of like tissue paper and magazine cuttings. So I wish I could have seen that in real life. But then also too, the chapters, how they're structured, kind of tries to tie like central ideas to how Herman Miller operates today. So our Alexander Girard chapter, which is centered around the Textile and Object Shop, which was Girard's first retail venture for Herman Miller, which acted as a textile showroom and a place to sell his folk art that he collected from around the world. That approach of merchandising and creating a store was very much baked into how we approached the design of our new retail store in New York City at 251 Park Avenue South. But yeah, I mean, even just the styling, but just to kind of show that nothing happens in a vacuum. And the way that we approach our design and spaces today, it's not like it's leaning completely on the past, but it's being informed by the past, and using it more as inspiration and a way of thinking, because, it was innovative at the time, but how can we bake in that DNA of our company to how we approach things now? Just to talk a little bit about the research project for this, and I'm sure a lot of you are designers, and I have a lot of people who are designers come to me and say, what do I save of my process? I'm going to walk you through some stuff of the Eames Collection. I don't suggest that this is the best way to keep things, because they kept a lot of things. But just to give you a sense, this is my favorite picture I took while I was in the reading room at the Library of Congress. You get a Library of Congress library card, which was like one of the coolest things that's happened to me thus far. But yeah, you're in this room and you're requesting document boxes from this giant, well-preserved, amazing collection that was donated to the Library of Congress by the Eames office after Ray's death in the 80s. But this is like meticulously organized. It takes a long time to get through things, but it just gives you a sense of how the Eameses approached their projects, their inspiration, their ideas, and then how they documented that, either for people to learn about their projects in the past, but they were also constantly iterating on ideas that they had already come up with. So if you look at the molded plywood furniture that then informed, that came out in the 40s, that then ultimately led to the Eames lounge and ottoman. So they never stopped. They never were done with an idea. And I think the way that they kept their own collections allowed them to go back, reference, and learn and build upon concepts. Also, there's just a lot of hand-drawn stuff, either by Ray or other people in the office. They helped with everything. They're not only like designing the furniture, but they're also helping with the marketing material as well, and how to educate people about either assembling their pieces, or how to use them or their intent. And I just love things like this, where this is probably just Ray sitting at her desk and like vibing out and being like, I think like this color, and she's even helping with the copy of what ultimately becomes a Herman Miller sales piece. But I mean, just think about this. Like, she was just doing this on a piece of paper one day and was like, yeah, this is pretty good. And then ended up getting saved and now can be referenced. And I look at stuff like this, I'm like, that's a great color palette. Like, you can look at a document like this and be like, I'm gonna lift these colors, or at least be inspired by how these are grouped together, whatever, or even how she's approaching type here. There's also great stuff like this in the collection where they're like documenting their own press clippings, but this is a Eames chair that the illustrator and artist Saul Steinberg drew on and then was exhibited, got a lot of press, but this says, "Want sitting nude kicked out of show. Controversy over drawing on plastic chair. Is it vulgar or is it art?" And this is 1951, so fun stuff like this. And then also, Ray voraciously collected decorative papers. And I literally just came across a folder that I pulled out and opened up, and it's just these scraps of paper. And initially you're like, what? But then you're like, this is an amazing color palette, and I want to get my nails painted these colors now. But just to kind of circle back and say that you can really find inspiration anywhere, and the tactility, and just even like going and sitting at the Grand Rapids Public Library that has an amazing furniture publications collection, or going and sitting in a space and physically interacting with material and getting context for how and why these things were created, that kind of inform beyond just seeing something on a screen or on a page. I think there's kind of nothing like going through masses of material and just absorbing like the inspiration or learning more about a process. There's also really sweet photos that they've collected. This is Ray at the Eames house. They have a huge color slide collection. There were sections like friends, showrooms, house, and this is a really nice photo of Ray outside of their house. But then again, you can also see how an institution like the Library of Congress keeps track of stuff like this. So what you see, maybe you can kind of see on the right, is the call number, and that's literally how you find things. It's probably like the less sexy part of preservation is creating metadata for stuff, but we literally would not have been able to make our book without somebody's very invisible work of documenting and creating records for this stuff. Just to give you a taste too, so the Eameses documented their own work. Alexander Girard, like I said earlier, was probably a better archivist than I will ever be, but he meticulously documented all of his projects, all of his inspirations, and these were binders that were in basically like a bunker in his house in Santa Fe, where he kept all of the folk art that he collected and then ended up placing in Herman Miller showrooms and clients' homes. You can still find some of it around here in Herman Miller facilities, but I just love this. This is like an archivist's dream of just like everything meticulously packed. This is all at the Vitra Design Museum now in Switzerland, and is actually part of a show that's traveling now on Girard's work. It's now in Santa Fe. But this is the bunker I'm talking about. So he bought a space adjacent to his house in the mountains of Santa Fe, and again, meticulously documented all of this folk art that he was buying from places like Mexico, other places in South America, Poland, all around Europe. But it's all there. Like, that's his own library, and it's amazing to me that somebody would document stuff like this themselves. And then now all of that eventually got turned into the museum, the Girard wing at the Museum of International Folk Art in Santa Fe. I would encourage you to get out there. But Girard was also an amazing curator. So he took all of the stuff that he collected and made these exhibits that weren't organized by place or time even, but just ideas. And so you can look at a case within these exhibits and you have stuff in there from Japan, Poland, Colombia, but it's a really great testament to how wherever you go, there you are. I think it's a great message for now. People all around the world share common themes and stories and whatever, and Gerard was really able to get at this through a very fun, very crazy, very overwhelming space that I spent 3 days in, and I don't even think I saw everything. I think the most recent exciting thing that we've been able to do because of preservation at Herman Miller is launch this book at New York Design Week, which was just a few weeks ago. But this is in our New York store. So we basically made like an IRL book exhibit. But this is the staircase ascending our second floor. The ads that you see up there are by Irving Harper, which is, again, part of this giant ad collection that we kept and now are able to do, large-scale installations of the company history. This is what you see when you walk in. Some really interesting text. But then it's a chance to display furniture that has also been kept over the years. So I juxtapose these things next to each other because Herman Miller started as an antique reproduction furniture company, and then DJ Dupree, out of necessity because the company was failing, but also like his vision as a businessman was just, I don't think it's something that really happens nowadays, in the sense that he took this huge risk on manufacturing modern furniture at a time where it wasn't even that like aesthetically interesting to him, but he understood that this new type of furniture that fit into people's lives more in architectural spaces that were being created. So if you think about the stuff on the left, like when that came out, it was made to look old. It wasn't actually old, and that was out of like people being like, I want it because it looks like it was in my grandma's house, and that's what I'm comfortable with, and like that seemingly makes sense. But in reality, when that was designed, people were living in like giant Victorian homes, and you had people to help dust your ornately carved furniture. It didn't actually fit into a one-room apartment. That was the reality of most like middle-class Americans at the time. And so Rhodey came in with way more of a Bauhaus approach in terms of modularity, but also furniture that was multifunctional, had like you could have a side table that also doubled as your liquor cabinet or your stereo system, but that served multiple purposes for you in your small space. But we tell the story at Herman Miller all the time, like we started off as an antique reproduction furniture company, but I think seeing these things next to each other is like really gives you the sense of what a leap this was, and it's just something that the company can really look back on now and use as fuel and inspiration going forward. This is a view of the exhibit. So the first chapter is about Gilbert Rhodey, but we were able to use photos from our collection and then ephemera that has been saved in the archives over the years. So early Eames furniture, drawings that are usually in drawers in my office, photos and pieces that, not this to use like a marketing term, like that Herman Miller has this company as a huge differentiator from our competitors in the area, and that we can tell stories like this is really powerful. And it's cool that we get to use tons of archival material to do it. This is for the chapter about Alexander Gerard, but again, can look at textile cards, sales materials, a giant wallpaper and textile book that kind of orients you to how this stuff was sold to clients at the time. Also very colorful, which is fun. Early catalogs. So again, this is a great, the graphic design history of this company is amazing, and it's so cool to see how it has evolved even from the early 30s up until now. But it's really cool to be able to place everything in context and give people a sense, not only in the book, but in a space as well of how you get from that point to another. See some picnic posters off to the left. But also this was a chance to talk about, you see Aeron chairs everywhere, but in reality, Ergon was our first ergonomic seating solution. Part of my job also is to go out and try and acquire stuff. So I put a call out on Yammer, which is Herman Miller's internal instant messaging system on our intranet. And I said, because we have an amazing network of retirees and people that have just worked here forever, I'm like, I need an original Ergon. Does anybody have one of these sitting around their house? Is there one in one of the facilities that anybody's ever seen around? And I ended up getting connected with a woman whose mother just passed away that sat in this chair every day and played the stock market. So I love thinking about that. And then even better from a design perspective, the brown looks really nice with the teal in real life. here's the model kit again, but just to give you guys more context of like the infinite amount of pieces that were in this thing. And they're discussing how to smash the patriarchy. If you've lived in West Michigan, you've definitely seen our trucks around, but I don't think they exist anymore, but there are these die-cast truck makers, and we have like tons of these little Herman Miller trucks around that I think people geek out like more than any. People are like, how can I get one of those trucks? You can't really find them, but here are like, you can see the progression of our logo from early John Massey, Helvetica vibes Herman Miller to Steve's Meta on the back. And then yeah, this is sort of the end. This is where the book was displayed at the end of the exhibit, but just wanted to give you a sense of how all of this stuff that has been saved and looked after over the years is now being implemented into how the business is run today, either very literally, either again through like working with our legal team or just for inspiration. I host our graphic designers, our editorial teams. It's really fun to be able to connect people to this material across the business. I've been here for about 4 years, and now I have people more coming to me, which is really cool because they know that it exists as a resource within the company. But yeah, that's it. Thank you.
We have about 5 minutes for Q&A. Oh, we already have a question. I was going to start off, but go on. You can start. I was going to ask you what your favorite thing you've ever archived is.
Oh God, that's impossible. People ask me this question, and my favorite thing is that the collection exists at all. Like, I think it's really, there have been other corporate entities that have kept corporate archives, and then usually when like lean times come, the first thing that goes is like, just get rid of the archives. It just costs money and whatever, no one uses it. Target is an example. Target had a really amazing corporate archive that they just like liquidated, and in the archives community it was very controversial. But I'm so lucky. On my listserv, it was crazy. But I feel so fortunate that it exists and that it is a valued resource here, and that I'm like not dusty off in a corner. So yeah, all of it is great.
Question?
Yeah. So first, it's an amazing collection. I agree. It's refreshing that they value the collection as much as they do. But my question for you is that we make so much digital work today
yeah.
with software.
Probably should have got to that.
Even like 3D modeling of new furniture pieces. So
Yeah.
How are you capturing any of that?
Yes and no. Like right now my job has been so focused on like interpreting the material. I think from a collection development standpoint, digitally, that's like not insurmountable, but something I think in my industry is sort of like how do you capture all of this stuff? And in my experience working with like the engineers and the engineering and R&D elements of the collection, it was a lot of self-documenting. So you had Pep Nagelkirk, who was head of the model shop, making files for every single project that he worked on and meticulously documenting it. Or again, the invisible labor of like an awesome admin who was great at keeping correspondence or having the understanding of what's important. And I kind of say to designers here and now, like, I think the volume of material that's generated is obviously like way more than it's ever been, but I use the term like, what are your aha moments? Like, what's at the start of the project? What's happening in between? And like, it's kind of on you. Like, I'm not an engineer. I'm not a furniture designer. Like, I can interface, but I also kind of put it on the person of understanding their own process and also like, what do you want documented? That kind of makes it a little bit subjective, but that's how this whole collection came to be. I mean, it literally started in DJ Dupree's secretary's file of like, I think we should keep this. I actually have an amazing folder that came from DJ, And in it is all of the earliest correspondence from George Nelson and like the entire genesis of this relationship. And on it, DJ put a note. He's like, I kept this for sentimental reasons. Like, I don't know that it's that important. So if you want to throw it away, go ahead. Thank God that didn't happen. But it was, again, this like self-documenting, or I don't know, I harp on it, but like archival work and labor is so invisible to people. Like, this stuff just doesn't happen on its own. And then that also relies upon people in more administrative positions that are tasked with managing people's calendars and or correspondence. So DIY archiving for now. But yeah.
Time for a few more questions.
Grand Rapids Ballet will turn 50 in 2 years. Sadly, nobody has kept an archive. I know I'm simplifying this, but what advice would you give to get started?
Do you have like a robust community of people that have been involved with the ballet over years?
Yes.
Reach out to them, because people keep stuff, and like so much of the good stuff that has come to Herman Miller's archive have been like amazing retirees that are like, I found all these catalogs, do you want them? Sometimes it's like, no, because it's stuff that you already have, but also you can sort of make that decision at the touch point of like, oh no, this is great. And it also like creates a sense of community, and people are sort of all contributing to a history of an entity or a thing. So I would reach out. Also, the library, I'm sure, has a clippings collection or something that or the Grand Rapids Public Museum. I would tap on the network locally of institutions that have been charged with documenting Grand Rapids history in general and go from there.
Time for one more question. If anyone has one.
I just had a question about something that you said, which I thought was quite lovely. You said, wherever you go, there you are. And I'm just curious as to what that means to you in an era and age where we're so distracted digitally or doing work virtually. How do you get out of either the future or the past and be in the present moment?
I think the way that I think about it, doing the work that I do, that's a lot of, I'm looking at the past a lot, but also through the lens of facilitating use now and having people understand that, again, nothing happens in a vacuum. So even if you think you have this like amazing, innovative idea, somebody probably already did it. And how can you learn or build upon, knowledge or inspiration from the past? And I look at, business objectives now that Herman Miller has, or the way that we talk about office furniture or sitting or whatever, or people. And a lot of the language is very similar to what the Duprees were saying from a management standpoint early on. George Nelson, Alexander Girard. And again, I think some people have this aversion to like, well, I don't want to look at the past because like it's retro, or like I don't want to be inspired or too informed by something. But I think like you have to know where you've come from to know where you're going, to use another like cheesy term, but it's true. Like you have to have understanding and context for whatever you do creatively, from an engineering aspect, whatever, to build upon that, because there's work there that exists that can inform your work, make it better. Or you can look at something and be like, that sucks, don't do that. Like I can make it better. So that's what I mean, kind of.
Can we all give Amy a round of applause?
Thank you. Thanks for coming.